Hi, and welcome to Health Talks. My name is Olu Awosoga. I'm the current Board of Governors Teaching Chair here at the University of ULSU. I want to start by rendering the territorial acknowledgement. Okay, the University of ULSBridge Blackfoot name is Iniskim, meaning Sacred Buffalo Stone. The university is located in traditional Blackfoot Confederacy territory. We honor the Blackfoot people and their traditional ways of knowing and caring for this land, as well as all Aboriginal people who have helped, shape, and continue to strengthen our university community. It is my pleasure to be here today with an important guest in the person of Dr. Caroline Hodes. She is an associate professor in the Department of Women's and Gender Study, an active member of SNAC Plus, that is Support Network for Academics of Color Plus, and the University of ULSBridge Student Union Teaching Award winner at 2020-21. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you are welcome.
Thank you.
Let us start. Just tell us a brief background on how you got into teaching and how you came to University of ULSBridge.
Okay, I've been teaching for a very long time, actually. I started out as a music teacher. That's how I paid my way through graduate school, actually, as playing music and teaching music. And then when I was in my PhD, I started to realize that as a TA, we weren't trained in how to teach. There were workshops and things like that you could attend, and I attended many of them, but I enjoyed teaching, and I wanted to learn pedagogical approaches. And so what I did was I actually enrolled in a Bachelor of Education program, and I did that concurrently with my PhD, and then graduated from both in the same year. And I figured that if I could teach a demographic of people who are legally mandated to attend school, then I could teach anyone. And so what I ended up doing was teaching high school, or being trained in teaching high school at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at University of Toronto. And I worked with a social justice cohort where we worked in schools that were labeled as being at risk, and that was generally because of the populations they served. And in fact, my mother, who came here as a displaced person after the Second World War, attended one of the schools labeled at risk, and has been labeled at risk since she attended it to do my practicums. And so I was always going into Bloor Collegiate on Dufferin and Bloor in Toronto, and seeing pictures of my mother as one of the graduates in the hallways of that school.
Wow, what a noble beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, then why did you choose to come to University of ULSBridge?
Well, I applied for jobs. I mean, as everybody knows, once you get out of your PhD, you apply everywhere in your field. And I got an interview here, and I learned that the University of ULSBridge is known for its small class sizes and its concern with teaching as being equivalent to research, and that there's a balance between teaching and research here. So small class sizes and a smaller teaching load, so you can actually get to know your students as they go through. So this is a very rewarding part about teaching at the University of ULSBridge, is you can get to know students in the first year of their program and see how they develop over the course of their time here. So that's not something you get at larger institutions where you have, introductory courses of 300 people.
Yeah, that is why University of ULSBridge is known for as one of the best, the top 3 in the last 7-8 years in Canada, because of our class sizes, the way we pay attention, we are very close with our students, knowing their names, getting the smaller classes. That's one of the good characteristics that people know with University of ULSBridge. Now, I know you are involved a lot in undergraduate teaching and as well as graduate teaching. Can you give us some insight on how this have changed your teaching approach?
Okay, yeah. It was interesting because when I first started, I did sessional teaching for 2 years before I came to the University of Lethbridge. And I had the unique opportunity to be teaching graduate students and undergraduate students as part of those sessional appointments. So I taught undergraduate students at Trent University, and I taught graduate students in the Master of Public Administration program at Queen's University. And those students were made up of lawyers and policymakers and people who were employed, who were coming in to get a master's degree to kind of work their way up the ladder in their particular professions. And so I was able to start, I guess, cut my teeth on university teaching in that way, designing courses for both groups of people. And so that was a really great experience. And so the difference between graduate student teaching and undergraduate student teaching, I think the main difference is that graduate students are coming in with a project that they have an idea they want to do, they want to complete something, they want to do some research, they want to learn how to put together a project and manage a project appropriately. And so there's a lot less I suppose, managing of graduate students. So my graduate seminars are really kind of a hands-off approach. I let the students take over the classes, and it's all about their interpretations of the material and how they're going to approach their methodologies, because I teach a discourse analysis class. So at Queen's, I taught policymakers, Indigenous law, and public policy. And so that was a course that focused on legal procedures and different kinds of major cases and the impacts of public policies on different communities. And so discourse analysis is much different in the sense that it's a methodology course. And so I'm teaching them how to find their way of approaching discourse analysis. And so in order to do that, you have to kind of let them be a little freer and to experiment with things and to use it as a kind of testing ground for how their methods are going to work for their overall projects. Whereas undergrads, I think, need a little bit more direction and need a little bit more structure in the way that the course is run. And so my teaching for undergraduate students is very similar to the way that high school teaching is approached actually in Ontario. And so a lot of the things that happen at the Teaching Centre, I find, the activities that I've learned and the kinds of strategies that I've learned from the Teaching Centre here at the University of Lethbridge are very much in keeping with taking these strategies for secondary school and applying them to a university context. So lots of activities, lots of discussion, lots of group work with the students, and having them kind of have a sense of mastery over what they're doing, but at the same time giving them a structure and some kind of framework within which to work. And so I use constructivist approaches. So I use technology a lot in my classes, which is interesting because I didn't find the transition from in-person teaching to online teaching that difficult, because all of my courses are already kind of blended, because I use Moodle and I put everything up there for the students in advance. They have all of the videos we're going to watch, all of the readings we're going to read, all of that stuff is put up there in advance with all of the assignments. And so I also put my lecture slides on after the lectures that I give, and so they have the opportunity to revise and review the things that are up on Moodle. The only difference is, of course, when you're online and you're trying to do a synchronous class, it's a bit awkward to get that discussion going sometimes. And I think that, but I do think that the social component of undergraduate teaching and building cohort in classes and building community building is very much a part of my teaching strategy with them, gets lost a little bit in the online environment. So that can be difficult for them, and it can also be difficult for me. We're always kind of like ships passing, you know.
Yeah. It's good that you raise the transition from face-to-face to online, which happened at the University of Lethbridge in March. It was very stressful for some people, and some people who are used to online teaching before doesn't see any big deal.
Yeah.
So how does this affect the way you present materials in class? Do you adopt the asynchronous or the asynchronous approach or the synchronous approach? I know you have mentioned the use of Moodle. I know Moodle is great because I myself, I use Moodle. I uploaded all my materials for students, even during face-to-face, for them to prepare blended materials, voice, or recorded lectures. They are there for them to prepare, because I give quiz every class. So students are on their toes in my classes. Can you elaborate more on how this transition to online and how you are finding it now?
I'm finding it's not too bad. I mean, the internet connection sometimes with some of my students that becomes a bit of an issue with some people. But I do the synchronous approach. So I try to run the lectures as though we're in person, except we're online. So the only difference is that we're tuning in through Zoom. And the reason I do that is because I think it maintains that community building that is so central to feminist pedagogy in particular, and to divide them into breakout rooms so they can get to know each other and get a sense of community as they're going through their undergraduate degree. And it's really important, especially now with COVID-19, because people are struggling with their mental health right now, and people are struggling with coping with the lockdowns and the uncertainty and all of these different things. And so I think it's important to create a space where students can come together, especially those students that this is their first year of university and they don't have any other sense of what university is like. They're starting out in conditions of pandemic, and they have to I suppose in some ways they're going to be adapted to this way of learning already, but at the same time, it can be very challenging if you're new, you don't know anybody in Lethbridge, maybe you've moved here, maybe you're staying at home and doing everything online, but to feel like you don't really know anybody, but yet you're coming together in these classes, it must be very strange for them. So I try to build a sense of community by actually having them work through questions together, doing group work, having conversations with one another, doing things like a think, pair, share, where they think about the answer to a question in pairs and answer that in the online setting, and to also have large group discussions so they get a sense of who thinks in what ways and how they can connect with one another. So I also have group work that they're doing, so that I think is very important, because then you get to know the group that you're presenting with, and you get to have some friends, so once we get back to in-person learning, that they'll come here having, knowing people and being able to recognize people that they've talked to and worked with online.
Yeah, that's a very good approach you are adopting. I find the use of breakout rooms very interesting, because it allows students to be freer, discuss among themselves, and even when I bump into some breakout room, you see them exchanging life experience. I said, well, have we finished discussing the topic of the day? They say, oh, it's here. So it's very interesting. Students are using it, but the concern of many professors is accessibility to conducive environment, learning from home, especially for parents. Who are trying to do adult education, catering for their children, and at the same time attending classes, doing some part-time job to cope. It has been the concern of many professors, and also accessibility to good internet. I noticed even just yesterday, some of my students said, oh, I was shut out. My internet just break. I said, well, okay, what do you want me to, where did you want us to go over? Then I have to repeat myself and explain all over again. But that one thing that is good about this system is that we record all the lectures and we still post it immediately after the lectures. So they're able to review it, and even if they miss any part of it, they can easily catch up. So it's very interesting. Now, I can see some kind of flipped classrooms during your face-to-face of something like active learning, giving more responsibility to students. What can you say about these innovative ideas? Because I've seen many professors discussing, oh, I flip my classroom now. So the students are now taking responsibility for their learning. You're able to give them some form of independence so that they can take up some responsibility in class in terms of materials, like use of groups now. They can present, they can take topics that build them up for future work, because either they like it or when they work, they have to learn how to work in teams, how to work with their colleagues,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of my classes are actually built around that premise. So I have them. My assignments are about creating as many options as possible for them. For instance, in my 3070 class, Human Rights and Political Economies, this is the first class that I taught when I came to the University of Lethbridge. I've been teaching it all the way through. And so they are asked to do 2 different assignments to explore 2 different conceptions of power. And so in the first assignment, they're asked to find an organization and to approach people from that organization to be able to talk about their human rights mandate and then to situate that within recognition and redistribution dilemma. And so it's their responsibility to go out and find the organization, to talk to the people, to read all the materials, to do any extra research. And it's also a great way for them to find out about different local organizations that they might want to work for in the future. So that's part of, that's built into the course, and they write a paper about that, and then they've built some community connections through that particular activity. And then the last activity in that course is about getting together in a group and finding a human rights campaign that they can analyze and sort of learn how, okay, so if we don't think that what this particular campaign is doing is working, how would we do it differently? And so they're learning from the course materials, they're learning from the different campaigners, and then I have guest speakers coming in so that they can learn how to do this stuff and how to critique it in an appropriate way, in a way that recognizes the hard work that goes into these things, but at the same time shows different ways of improving it. So that aspect of my courses, all of my classrooms, I suppose, are flipped in that sense, that they're getting the opportunity to build their skills, to go out and find things. We also have, in my 2850 class, my feminist legal theory class, we actually explore sites of law. So we take an expansive concept of law in that class, and they have to go find a geographic location and talk about how it's being regulated and how the law impacts people in that particular space. And so it's their job to actually go out, and we actually go out on these little field trips around the university and do preliminary analyses of each space we visit as a site of law, so they get a sense of what's expected of them in that assignment. So sometimes we actually go out of the classroom entirely. And so now that we're online, it's easier for them to kind of walk around and find sites of law and use their environment as a classroom.
That's good. That's good. You mentioned teaching center in the course of the discussion. How involved are you with the teaching center at the University of Lethbridge?
So I have presented at the Spark Teaching Symposium. So I did a presentation on privacy and what it means to use the internet in different forms and different ways for your classes, the difference between using Moodle, which is a site specific to the university, versus Facebook or LinkedIn or something like that. And so I've presented on those issues with Paula Cardozo from the library. She's the Women and Gender Studies subject librarian, and so she often comes into my classes and talks to my students, and they learn all sorts of. They learn about the trail that they leave through searching. And I hope that doesn't scare them off using the internet, but because they're not only consuming knowledge on the internet, they're also producing it, right? And so that's a very interesting perspective. So we presented on that at the Spark Teaching Symposium early on, and I participated in their mentorship program. And so I was very fortunate to work with Ann Diamond and Mike Medor last year before the pandemic, and to have them do class observations for me and to share teaching strategies. And so they have very effective learning strategies. And it was also great to participate in that program, because sometimes when you're doing things in the classroom, you feel like, am I the only person that's doing this? Is this, am I on the right track? And so it's good to get people who've been teaching for longer than you have and who've been teaching here for longer than you have to be able to come in and to kind of set your mind at ease, to say, yeah, okay, this is good, but hey, maybe you could look at this or modify that in these ways, right? So it's very important. And I've had Janae Nugent actually come into my first year class and give me a teaching evaluation, and that was very, very helpful. She's a fantastic teacher at this university. And yeah, so I have worked with the Teaching Center, and they've helped me with Moodle a lot over the years. The emergency phone calls, my Moodle's not working.
Yeah, actually, all of us run to the Teaching Center whenever we face problem with Moodle. Yeah, the mentorship program is actually very interesting. I've served as a mentor also on that program in the last 3 years. It's a good way of preparing new hires, especially those who are coming to the field to alleviate their stress or their fears by showing them different ways of presenting materials, active learning, how you can get students engaged. I find it very, very interesting and effective in a way of supporting faculty members at the University of Lethbridge. I've not seen one of all the mentees that have passed through the program complaining that they were not well guided. They are always very appreciative of what they have learned. Yeah, so our teaching center, they are actually up to the task, and I was surprised on the role they play in moving from face-to-face to online within days, introducing boot camp.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you heard about the teaching boot camp.
Yeah, I did. I did hear about that. But I've also done online teaching before. So I thought, during my PhD, I actually taught for Memorial University. I taught in their Law and Society program and did online courses from Toronto. And so that was a good experience. Like, all my experiences have actually prepared me for this pandemic, which is really strange to say, but like, having online experience and also having my teaching degree, one of the best things I ever learned in my Bachelor of Education was that, tomorrow's another day, and you can't expect everything to go perfectly. And I used to say, like, walking into the high school for my practicum was like walking into a blender. And the day somehow passed, you did a lot of things, and then you'd walk out stunned, like, what just happened to me, right? And so teaching is a little bit like that. You can't predict what's going to happen in a classroom. No class or no course that you teach is ever going to be the same twice. It's all dependent on the interactions and relationships you have with your students. And so you have to be flexible. You have to be forgiving of yourself and others. And like I went through a long period of feeling like every class I let my students down, like I was like, just feeling like, wow, that was the worst class I've ever taught, like every class. And just to know that, no, actually, you don't have to cram everything in one day. You don't have to, expect perfection from yourself or your students, and things are going to happen. So you have to be flexible. All sorts of things happen during the course of a year that you can't predict. People get sick, people die, right? And the students have to adjust to the different circumstances. You have to make adjustments to your course. And so to let it go at the end of the day is a good idea.
Yeah, that must have been one of the reasons why you are nominated and you won the University of Lethbridge Student Union Teaching Award, because your students know that you care. You reflect on after every class, and you're able to give the best and continue improving. So what has been your experience since you have been informed that you are now the teaching award winner at the University of Lethbridge?
I was really honored to receive that award. I was actually really surprised. So the ULSU sent me this email, "Congratulations, you won an award." And I was like, I sent them an email, "What did I win an award for?" I said, "Oh yeah, you won the teaching award." And I was really surprised by that, because I don't know, like I'm very self-critical about the things that I do in the classroom, and so it was surprising, but it was a very humbling experience. Actually, I was really happy that my students nominated me for that, because the students see you every day. They see your teaching every class. They see you on your good days, on your bad days. They know when you're behind in your grading, like I am right now, and so it was a real honor to receive that award from them, and also a humbling experience in some ways, to say, okay, so I have to keep, I've set a certain bar for myself now, and I have to keep that going, and I have to keep learning and being there for them.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of support coming from University of Lethbridge Student Union, both graduate student union as well, graduate student association. They are always in supporting faculty members and trying to get the best, because they see that we are all out to support our students, giving our best to them, and show that we care for them, which is one of the most interesting thing that experience that you have at the University of Lethbridge here. Apart from teaching undergraduate and graduate students, I know you have been involved in supervision of independent studies, honors thesis, graduate thesis as well. What has been your experience?
Okay, so I have supervised a lot of independent study students. I haven't done an honors thesis yet, but I have done a lot of independent studies, and right now I'm supervising a master's student in the CSBT program. And so yeah, it's interesting. Like, the projects are so interesting, and I always learn from the independent study students at the same time as they're learning from me. So I have 4 this term, which is a lot.
4 independent studies.
Independent studies.
How are you coping?
Well, 3 independent studies and 1 applied studies. Yeah, this is the first time I've taken on this many, and maybe I should not do that in the future.
That's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, but they're such great projects, right? So I was really excited about all their projects, and 3 of them are going through ethics processes because they want to interview people, and one of them's already on her interview phase of the project. And so I find those courses to be an opportunity to collaborate with the student, to design a project that they can complete. And it's kind of, for a lot of them, it's their first kick at the can in project management, really. Like, they're going through and they're saying, okay, so I want to learn about this and I want to write about that. And I need to be able to follow these steps or find this literature, find what the hole is that I'm trying to fill. And so for them, I think it's a really wonderful opportunity. And I don't think you get this kind of opportunity at larger institutions. Like, I mean, I certainly didn't when I went to U of T for my undergraduate degree in this big school, St. George campus, 300 people in your first year. You don't really get to know anyone. You're trying to figure out the city. Like, yeah, so the idea of doing an independent study with a professor, the idea of even talking to a professor as an undergraduate student at the University of Toronto was a daunting thing. And so here you can actually develop these personal relationships with people, and you can really mentor them well through the process. Okay, so the first step in designing a research project, and how are you going to propose this? And you can build in all of those steps that if they want to eventually go to graduate school, so a lot of undergraduate students in their 4th year are like, I'm never going to graduate school.
That's what they say.
I just want to get out of here.
I know.
but once they graduate, you can't predict the future, so they may decide to come back. And having had that experience of doing an independent study and being able to, go through the ethics process and to do that literature review and to write the annotated bibliography, they've already got skills that people coming into an MA program who've graduated potentially from much larger institutions don't have those skills coming in. They're learning those skills as they start their masters instead of having had the opportunity to do that at the undergraduate level. So I think that's another strength of the University of Lethbridge.
Yeah, successful mentoring program is one of the greatest characteristics of a good supervisor. Now, for some graduate students, they have what they want to do, but they think big.
Yes.
Yep. They will tell you, I will get that. In 2 years, can you get this thing done? PhD, can you finish? Do you think you can finish in 4 years? So how have you been able to manage them?
Yeah. Yeah, trying to.
Expectation.
It's a fine balance, trying to rein people in and also give them the freedom to be able to think all of those things. And sometimes I think for graduate students in particular, well, even undergraduate students who are doing an independent study, we've got to let them fall down that rabbit hole for a little while. Watch them sweat. I know I did. My committee did that to me. Okay, sure. You do that. I hope that works for you. And then eventually they come back, well, actually, maybe that's not going to be possible. And then you can start to give more direction, right? Because people get very attached to their ideas, and I think it's important to allow that space of attachment, and then that's also part of the learning process. Learning like, okay, I was really attached to this idea, but maybe I need to, change it a little bit, just tweak it a little bit, narrow it down a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. I know that you have been involved in SOTO, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, some projects in the past. Some project on Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, how to improve teaching pedagogy in the university. How involved are you with some other projects that you are doing currently?
I guess you could say that part of the research process on pedagogy, I'm working with Glenda Bonifacio on the RED project, the rights, project that we're working on, and we're preparing an equity toolkit actually for the University of Lethbridge. So that's a pedagogical process, and that was funded through the Alberta Human Rights Education and Multiculturalism Fund. And so I haven't really been part of the teaching center's grant opportunities, but this is also part of education and working on developing approaches to equity. And equity in curriculum is really important. It's extremely important, especially given the TRC's recommendations, right? And and all the focus on racial justice right now. This is a really important time for people to be learning. And so I was asked to do, for instance, the feminist theory course that's part of the requirement for our program in WGST. And so I designed it around the events that are happening right now, and weaving in some of the history of, civil rights history and the history of activism that has informed different racial justice and abolitionist movements over time, so that the students can get a sense that what's happening right now with Black Lives Matter, what's happening right now in terms of the defund the police campaigns and all these sorts of things, these aren't new, right? These have been with us for a very long time. And so, all of the indigenous rights movements as well, these are not new either. And so to read different kinds of scholarship that have emerged out of these social movements becomes very important, and to weave that, incorporate that into curriculum so that they understand that, so that they're getting indigenous histories and Black histories and all of these things together to say, okay, so how does that shape your ideas of what feminism actually is, as opposed to all of the stuff that appears in the popular media, denouncing feminism as bra burning and man hating and that kind of thing, right? So to dismantle these stereotypes over the course of your teaching and learning. And so that's kind of what I do when I'm teaching theoretical approaches to feminism. And the notion of praxis, right? So theory is practice. And so these become very important things as part of changing curriculum, as part of understanding that a focus on one particular narrative is not really going to teach people effectively. You have to incorporate epistemic pluralism, different ways of seeing, different ways of thinking, and that have come out of different kind of social groups. So this is part of the equity toolkit, really, is to be able to understand how to modify your own curriculum in your courses, but also to knowledge share. So one of the things that was really interesting from the transition from teaching in high school context to teaching in a university context is this notion of academic freedom. And so quite often people incorporate their ideas of academic freedom to the point where they're becoming very protectionist over their course materials, right? And in teachers' college, it was free for all. Like, oh, this worked in my class. Here, use it. And like, take it away and do something with it, right? And so it was a very different kind of culture that I was coming into. And so I think that there needs to be a distinction. Like, yes, academic freedom in the sense that you should be able to teach your courses how how you want to teach them and design them and all of those sorts of things. But at the same time, it shouldn't preclude you from sharing that material with your colleagues and to say, hey, you know, I have this really great reading, or hey, I'm looking to diversify my curriculum a little bit, or I'm looking for authors or writers or activists who have done certain things, and I'm looking for readings from them, or I'm looking to ask people to do presentations in my class. Who would you recommend, and that kind of thing. So this all speaks to the culture of equity in an institution. So it's not just about developing policies or having certain kinds of hiring committees or whatever. It's also about the culture within the student body and the culture within the faculty members that exist here, right? So within in between. And so getting people to kind of, you know, talk about difficult issues and to have those hard conversations. And so in my classes, when we, you know, I've done a lot of reading and research on safe spaces, and I really enjoy Rose Weitz's article in Feminist Teacher, where she talks about teaching dangerously, and that a classroom needs to address the difficulties that exist in the world. And so in my classes, we talk about racism, we talk about genocide, we talk about, you know, settler colonialism, we talk about all of these things, and it opens up a space. It's not safe. There's nothing safe about that.
That's true.
But it opens up a space for people to talk about things that they know are happening and that are affecting them in their everyday lives. And so that's where safety as comfort, I think, is not a great thing to have in pedagogy. Actually, it's not about your comfort. And you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Right, and so this idea of safety instead of as comfort, but as being able to handle whatever walks through the door. Right?
Yeah.
Especially now. I mean, COVID walked through the door. Now, what are we doing about that? Right?
Yeah. In the process of the conversation, I heard you saying that people are not able to share materials. This wasn't my experience when I came to University of Lethbridge.
Yeah.
Although I've had 20 years of post-secondary teaching before coming to University of Lethbridge in 2009, but on getting here, I was surprised. Senior professors, they just called me. Oh, this is material, because I was taking over their courses. These are the materials I've developed. If you want to use it as a foundation, the undergraduate staff also, I remember Professor Emeritus Brad Higgins, before he retired, gave me all the materials and tried to mentor me. Professor Williams also did the same thing to me. So I was blessed with people who are ready to support and carry. And that's why I'm very passionate with new hires to assist them, to settle down, to make sure they are comfortable. University of Lethbridge has become a home. I find it very accommodating and welcoming to new hire. How did you feel when you first came?
Well, when I first came, when I found the teaching center and when I found the mentorship program, that was really a turning point for me, right? Because when I first got here, I felt, well, it's also because in smaller departments where there's constantly fiscal crisis going on, and we didn't get a replacement hire for one of us who retired, right? So we're all, I mean, this is why I'm taking on 3 independent studies and one applied study on top of my regular teaching load, because we're actually short-staffed in our department. So there's a kind of, I didn't want to impose on my colleagues who are already overworked, and I also didn't feel comfortable kind of reaching out to other people because I was new and I didn't really know anyone. And so, so the teaching center was a real turning point for me in terms of, okay, you know, and Janae Nugent is a person who really told me about them and was introducing me to different approaches and stuff like that. So I did find some things welcoming, but also depending on your department and depending on how understaffed you are, it can be a challenge for new hires who come in and suddenly it's like, okay, this is the expectation, right? And this is, and I think part of the reason I was hired here is because of my teaching experience, my teaching degree. So thinking, okay, we're not going to have to mentor her as much. Maybe she'll help take some of the workload down. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. So this is also my way of asking for a new hire in women and gender studies. We We need one.
we have all those names you are mentioning. They are all past board of governor teaching chairs.
Yeah.
Like Shelley Whitmer, Jane Newberry, Jane Nugent, Sheila McManus. All of them have been very supportive mentor, because up to now I'm still working with Sheila.
Yeah.
I still work with Shelley. So they still send students to me. I still work with them on some projects, as well as moving the teaching center forward. I find it very interesting and very helpful in sending new hires. Do you know our teaching center? Have you been there? Talk to them. They are there to support you. And people come back, thank you. I really enjoyed my conversation with them. I learned a lot. And it has been a blessing to have the staff of the teaching center in the university. Yeah. They do a lot of things with even training graduate students how to teach, presenting workshop, helping faculty members to in training how to use technology. I find that very useful even in the recent days of online or virtual delivery of lecture. Many of us are not technologically sound, so we struggle sometimes, but we get over it. After complaining, we sit down and learn it and get to use it.
Yeah.
As we are discussing, I would like you, if you don't mind, to share your philosophy of teaching, your teaching goals, and pedagogy with our viewers.
Okay, so I guess my philosophy of teaching, I call it teaching dangerously, following Rose White's. And it's kind of a reaction to safe space as comfort, because I don't think it's good to, when people are comfortable, it means that they aren't leaving their comfort zone. And so for me, I try to push my students out of their comfort zone to take risks and to be able to speak their truth, right? And if you want to speak your own truth, you want to speak a truth about something else, you have to have the strength and resilience to be able to receive whatever comes back at you. And so having done a bunch of different kinds of media presentations over the years here, there are a lot of, people who are going to disagree with you. They're going to make potentially rude comments. They're going to say all sorts of things. And so how are you going to handle that, right? It's not a commentary on you, what other people are saying. It's how do you handle whatever comes your way. And so that's what I'm interested in helping my students cultivate in their own lives. And I think about the vice presidential debate. I don't know if you watch the vice presidential debate where Kamala Harris is, they're both in this very unsafe space, right? They're in a pandemic, they're in person, they have plexiglass between them. Mike Pence has just been in the White House, likely surrounded by people who are infected by COVID. And so they're having this debate, and she's so poised. And no matter what comes out of his mouth or how many times he interrupts her, could you please wait till, I need to, I'm not finished yet, And so I'm thinking to myself, this is a really interesting moment for the students, right? To watch this and to say, okay, so being able to speak your truth, to be able to articulate your views, your beliefs, your research, in the face of widespread opposition, how you react becomes very important, and how you internalize those things also becomes very important. Do you internalize them as a form of self-doubt, or are you going to build on that to say, okay, so, maybe in this series of comments, there was something I could glean from that. There was something I could take away. And so getting up there and doing that is not safe. There's nothing safe about it, right? There's nothing safe about being a professor in front of a classroom.
I agree with you.
There are more of them than you. And so So when you're thinking about it in these ways, when you think about all the power relationships, I want to cultivate the resilience in my students to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, to think for themselves, to be able to think critically, and to be able to articulate what they feel needs to be said in any given moment. And that includes talking about difficult things. For instance, like racism. One of my students just got an op-ed piece published in the Herald, and we worked on that with each other because she had an experience, a really negative experience in a store, and she turned it into something that could teach others. She turned it into something that was a form of community pedagogy and community outreach. And this is really brilliant. And that's what I want my students to learn how to do, to take some of these more negative experiences that they're going to have in life and to transform them into the building blocks of that kind of resilience.
Yeah. What about your teaching goals?
So my teaching goals, I guess, I just want to keep learning new strategies and new ways of doing things and to be able to continually develop my teaching. I don't want to stagnate as a teacher. Sometimes you find, okay, and this speaks to the whole comfort zone thing, right? Like, oh, this course works. Okay, this is good. I've had mostly good experiences teaching this course in this way, so I'm just going to keep it. And that's not necessarily good teaching. You have to update your courses. You have to switch things up a little bit, change the way that things are done. Because otherwise, when you're hitting something like the COVID-19 move to online teaching, that can be either an opportunity or, not so much, right? And so to take all of these things that come your way as opportunities and to also cultivate that resilience in myself.
That's good. That brings me, you mentioned community outreach during your talking about your philosophy of teaching and pedagogy. How involved are you in the community?
I don't know.
How do you bring community into your classroom?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? So I don't know if I could answer how involved I am in community because I never really know. You know what I mean? Like, you think, well,
but sometimes you do invite guest speakers, you send your student out. How do you try to manage the exchange between the classroom and the community that we find ourselves?
I guess I look at the community as the classroom because I don't think that the university is necessarily separate from the community because you get that dichotomy that people create, like, oh, there's the ivory tower over there in the coulee and everyone else is over here. And I don't think that that's the case. I think that the university is the community is the university. And that becomes really apparent when your students come into your office. And especially, I've been writing different things with some of my colleagues and former students at the University of Lethbridge about the opioid crisis, for instance. And the opioid crisis is in the university, right? We are not separate from the opioid crisis. No. It's affecting our students, it's affecting faculty, it's affecting people's family members. And so this is this moment where there's no distinction between the two spaces, really. And so what people are doing in the university actually filters out into the community. So like my student who's writing the op-ed about her experience at the store, and then when I'm writing op-ed pieces with colleagues, or when I'm doing radio interviews, for instance, I wrote a piece for the LSA about the Chicago principles and what that means to unite the right, really, under freedom of expression, and then at the same time as you're curtailing freedom of assembly. And so I wrote this for the Law and Society Association, and then I was asked, I wrote a piece for The Conversation, which is this newsletter kind of thing for academics to write pieces that are accessible online for everybody. And so I wrote this piece for The Conversation on that. And then I got a call from Indigenous Radio, Element FM, to give a talk on this, an interview on this on the radio station. And so this is how all of this kind of, from the university space to the conference space to the newsletter space to the news space and you move around in all of these different spaces. And so what I'm trying to teach my students is about this notion of praxis, that you're not just, in your head in a space outside of the world. Everything that you're thinking about, that you're theorizing, that you're writing about is coming from the world,
Exactly.
right? And it's coming from your reactions and your responses to the world in which you live. Yeah, and so this becomes very important. So participating in things like the die-in that happened at the end of August when Arches was closed down, and going to the BLM marches and all of these things. And I encourage my students to attend, right? You know, I mean, people think, oh, that's controversial, but I don't think it is.
It's an experience.
It's the world. It's the world you live in, right? This is something that's happening, and it's real, and it's a part of your life, and it affects the university. The university released a statement about it, right? Even our faculty association, they released a statement about it. And so if you're pretending that somehow the university is separate from the community, I think that's the first place that needs to be deconstructed, that idea of the separation of the two. So I kind of look at, as I look at everything as the classroom, I guess I kind of move between, or I don't even know if it's between spaces. I just kind of move through, exist in this community, I guess.
Based on your experience in teaching and at the University of Lethbridge, your pedagogy, your philosophy of teaching, what advice do you have for new hires or students who are completing their PhD and looking towards coming into academics? What advice do you have for them?
It's not in your control.
I like that.
None of it is in your control. Release the need for control. That's, I guess, my first piece of advice. But as far as teaching in the university, you also need to reach out to people. That was my big mistake when I first came here. I was afraid to reach out to people. You know, it's kind of, I was intimidated, you know, and I think like most new hires, I don't know, maybe I'm making a gross generalization here, but, you know, I came in and I'm like, oh, I'm a women's and gender studies professor, so I'm kind of in this underfunded department that a lot of people don't know what to do with. And I am trying to forge my way through research as an interdisciplinary scholar, which is also a challenge, right? In an institutional context where disciplines are entrenched, right? And so I'm coming in being all of these strange things to begin with. And so I felt very intimidated, and I felt like I couldn't reach out to people, and I couldn't, you know, ask for things. And so I would say, you know, reach out to people, ask for things, you know, go to the teaching center, go to your colleagues, come to me, you know, ask me a question. I'll happily share my teaching philosophy with you. You can use parts of it, or you can make fun of it, depending on what you need to do at any given moment. But, you know, like I think that reaching out to people is really important. And to also break down some of those barriers between, I mean, I'm not saying to deny power imbalances, because there are really, I mean, this is a hierarchical institution, let's be real, right? So there are definite power relationships between different people, and there's a power relationship between you and your students. But to also not feel like you have to be a certain type of person in front of the classroom, not to feel like you have to know everything, because you don't have to know everything.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake some of us or new hires make, that they know everything. I want to show the student, no, we are all co-learners.
Yeah, no, you have to show them how to learn new things, right? I mean, that's the whole point, right? And that's the point of research. I mean, when we're researching, we're learning, we're students in that moment, right? And so to divest yourself of the cult of expertise, I suppose, is one of the big things that I would say to new people coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, that is very good and very interesting that you are able to share part of your. But before I go, or before we round up, I would like you to look into how have you been involving students in your research, apart from teaching.
So I do hire, so when I'm applying for external funding, I'm always hiring students to work with me. So I've hired a number of graduate students over the years to work with me on discourse analysis. I work with some pretty challenging material. So in my research, I'm writing a book actually right now called Law's Archive, and it's about the violence, it's Unsettling Law's Archive actually, and it's about the violence in Law's Archive. And so I'm looking at 7 pivotal ancestral rights and title cases. So it's about Indigenous law, and so there's a lot of my personal history is wrapped up in this. My mother gave testimony to the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, and my father worked for Health and Welfare Canada Indian Affairs Branch, as it was called then. Yeah, and so he actually has worked on, or well, he passed away in 2013, but he worked on the opioid crisis, right, in the 90s. And so this has been ongoing for a very long time. This is not new. And so all of these factors have come into informing my research program. And so part of what I'm trying to do, and I'm so happy because I just received the support of Raymond Frogner and John Burrows to do this project. So I'm really excited, and they want to be interviewed for the project. And so to put together what I'd like to see in my lifetime is an archive with Indigenous law and legal cases and all those documents that are kind of sitting around in so many different places. And part of this is it stems from the fact that despite all the TRC's recommendations, a lot of students don't know. They don't know any of this history. They don't really know what land claims are about or what a land acknowledgement is and why, and they don't a lot of the times understand the full context of the TRC, for instance, because the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples made many of the same recommendations like almost 30 years earlier, right? So when I hire graduate students, I want students to work on my project with me. Like I want them to learn about these things.
Exactly.
I want them to work.
That's one of the things why I love working with graduate students, masters, PhD, even undergraduate. Sometimes those of them at higher level of undergraduate level, they can contribute a lot to scoping reviews, getting literature searched, and getting these things out. I'm still working with some doctoral students on my project now as the Board of Governors Teaching Chair, and that is a blessing because they are also learning.
Yep.
They are also seeing what we are experiencing.
Yep.
They can see some of the problems, some of the hurdles that we need to jump to be able to achieve or get to the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, absolutely. And to participate in interviewing. So I'm putting together 2 grant applications now where I want to be able to hire graduate students to help with the interview process, to help with the transcription process, to also help with compiling all of the data and really understanding this material. And it's challenging, though. It is challenging because a lot of the material, a lot of the testimony, because it is testimony in court, and so a lot of the people who are testifying in some of these cases, they are testifying to their residential school experiences, which is quite difficult. And not in the context of the TRC, in the context of a land claim, right? And so a claim to sovereignty, really. And so in the end, they have to work through a lot of really difficult and challenging material that has an effective impact on them. And so this is part of my pedagogy, right? So one of the things that I learned, one of the most important things that I learned, and I learned this from John Doron, and he's a Mi'kmaq scholar who taught a course at ULSU called Indigenous Perspectives for Everybody. And he's one of the survivors of the 60 scoop. And he taught the 4 directions approach to teaching and learning and research. And his philosophy, his idea was, well, I'm telling you these stories so you can tell them. Right? So if you hear a story, if I tell you my story, I want you to tell the story. And so I want you to take the 4 directions approach to teaching, where you're addressing the mental, the spiritual, the physical, and the emotional part of learning, and all of those parts of research, because we can't go through a research process, doing different projects or thinking about different projects without having feelings about those projects, without having a spiritual visual connection to those projects, right? Without having, it's not just this mental process, right? And so quite often people think that knowledge and teaching and learning and research are only about the mind, but they're about so many other things. And it's also about the physical process, because if you're working on documents that are documenting claims to sovereignty in a context of genocide, then you have to be able to address all of those things, right? And you have to be able to have the resilience to be able to address that material in a good way, in a positive way, in a way that's respectful.
Thank you very much for the passion you showed to teaching, and we appreciate your creating time to come today to participate in ED Talks, and we thank our viewers. Hope to see you around soon. Thank you.
Thank you.